There was a boy in the back of the classroom who nobody ever noticed. He was 17 years old, and he had spent most of his life learning how to become invisible. It was not something he wanted, but it was something that happened slowly over the years when you grow up without much money, and when your clothes are never quite right, and when you live in a part of town that people whisper about. Then you learn very quickly that staying quiet is easier than being seen. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. She left before the sun came up, and she came home long after it went down. Most nights he would hear her key in the door around 11, and he would pretend to be asleep because he knew she did not want him to see how tired she really was. They lived in a small apartment above a laundromat, and the sound of washing machines spinning became the soundtrack of his childhood. The walls were thin, and the heat never worked properly in winter, but it was home, and his mother made sure he never went to bed hungry, even when it meant she did. School was a different world for him at Westbrook High. The kids drove cars their parents bought them, and they wore shoes that cost more than his entire wardrobe. He did not hate them for it, because hate takes energy, and he had learned to save his energy for things that mattered. But he would be lying if he said it did not hurt sometimes. The way they looked through him like he was made of glass, the way conversation stopped when he walked by, the way nobody ever saved him a seat at lunch. So he sat alone, and he read books, and he watched the world go by like a movie he was not really part of. But there was one thing in his life that made him feel alive, one thing that made him forget about the holes in his shoes and the whispers in the hallway, and that thing was music. His grandmother had given him his first keyboard when he was 5 years old. It was old, and some of the keys stuck, and it sounded more like a toy than an instrument, but to him it was magic. She had been a piano teacher back in her younger days, before her hands got too stiff and her eyes got too weak. She would sit beside him on the couch and guide his small fingers to the right keys. She taught him how to read notes before he could properly read words. She told him that music was a language that everyone in the world could understand, and she made him promise that no matter what happened in his life, he would never stop playing. She passed away when he was 9 years old, and for a while he did stop. The silence in the apartment felt too heavy, and every time he touched the keys, he thought of her, and it hurt too much. But one night, about a year after she was gone, he had a dream about her. She was sitting at a beautiful grand piano in a room full of light, and she was playing something so beautiful that he woke up with tears on his face. That morning, he sat down at the old keyboard, and he played for the first time in over a year, and he never stopped again. His mother could not afford lessons, so he taught himself. He watched videos online for hours. He went to the public library and borrowed every book about piano they had. He practiced scales until his fingers ached, and then he practiced some more. When he was 12, the community center down the street got a donation of an old upright piano. It was out of tune, and the bench was wobbly, but to him, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He asked the man who ran the center if he could play it sometimes, and the man looked at this skinny kid with the hopeful eyes and said, yes. From that day on, he spent every free moment at that piano after school and on weekends, and during summer vacation, he would stay until they turned off the lights, and sometimes the man would let him stay even later because he could see something special in the way the boy played. By the time he was 15, he had taught himself pieces that most people spend years in expensive conservatories learning. Chopin and Beethoven and Debussy and Rachmaninoff. He did not have a teacher to tell him he was good, did not have anyone to enter him into competitions. He just had the music and the quiet hours and the feeling that when his fingers touched the keys, he was exactly who he's supposed to be. But at school, nobody knew any of this. Why would they? Never talked about it, and nobody ever asked to. His classmates, he was just the quiet kid in the old hoodie, the one who always looked down when he walked, the one who disappeared into the background like wallpaper. Then one day, everything changed. It was the beginning of senior year, and the music teacher announced a new assignment every student in the class would have to perform a piece on. The grand piano in front of everyone, it would count for a big part of their final grade. When he heard this, his heart started beating fast. For years he had dreamed of playing for people, of showing them what he could do, of finally being seen for something other than his worn-out clothes and his quiet voice. But the dream always felt impossible, because opportunities like this never came to kids like him. And now here it was a chance. He signed up before he could talk himself out of it, but as the weeks went by and the date got closer, he started to feel something heavy in his chest. It was not fear of the piano, because the piano was his safe place. It was fear of them, the other students who had never looked at him with anything but indifference. Ones who whispered and laughed and lived in a world so different from his own. What if they laughed at him? What if they did not understand? What if he opened up this part of himself that he had kept hidden for so long, and they just made fun of it? The night before the performance, he barely slept. He lay in bed listening to the washing machines downstairs, and he thought about his grandmother. He thought about all those nights at the community center. He thought about his mother working so hard just to give him a chance at something better, and he made a decision. He was going to play not for them, not for the grade, but for himself. His grandmother, who believed in him before anyone else. For his mother, who sacrificed everything for the little boy, who fell in love with an old broken keyboard and never fell out of love. He did not know what would happen when he sat down at that piano. He did not know if they would listen or laugh or look at their phones, but he knew one thing for certain. He was done being invisible. Tomorrow they were going to hear him, whether they wanted to or not. The morning came too fast. He woke up before his alarm and just lay there staring at the ceiling. His stomach felt like it was full of rocks, and his hands were already shaking, even though the performance was still hours away. He got dressed slowly and put on his cleanest shirt, which was not very clean at all, but it was the best he had. He looked at himself in the small bathroom mirror and tried to see what others saw when they looked at him, a skinny kid with messy hair and tired eyes. Nothing special, nothing worth paying attention to. He almost talked himself out of going to school that day. He stood by the front door with his backpack on his shoulder and thought about what would happen if he just stayed home. He could tell his mother he was sick. She would believe him because she always believed him. But then he thought about all those years of practice, all those nights alone at the community center, all those promises he made to himself and to the memory of his grandmother. And he opened the door and walked out. The bus ride felt longer than usual. Every stop felt like it took forever, and every minute that passed brought him closer to the moment he had been dreading and hoping for at the same time. When he got to school, the hallways were loud and crowded like always. People pushed past him without looking, and conversations happened all around him, but never included him. He made his way to his locker and grabbed his books and tried to breathe normally, but his chest was tight and his palms were sweaty, and he could not stop thinking about what was coming. The music class was in the afternoon. He had to get through 4 other classes first, and every single one of them felt like torture. He sat in the back and tried to focus on what the teachers were saying, but the words just floated past him like clouds. All he could think about was the piano. All he could see was that room full of students waiting to watch him fail. Lunchtime came, and he sat alone at his usual table in the corner of the cafeteria. He was not hungry, but he forced himself to eat half a sandwich because he knew he needed something in his stomach. A group of kids walked by his table, laughing about something on one of their phones. They did not even glance at him. To them, he was furniture, part of the background, just another empty chair. He watched them go, and he wondered what it felt like to belong somewhere, to have people who laughed with you instead of past you, to walk through the world like you had every right to be there. He finished his sandwich and threw away the rest and headed to the bathroom to splash water on his face. When he looked in the mirror again, he gave himself a small nod. "You can do this," he whispered to his reflection. "You have been doing this your whole life, just not in front of anyone." Bell rang for fifth period and his heart jumped into his throat. This wasn't music class. He walked down the hallway, and every step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the door of the music room, he paused for a moment and took a deep breath. Then he pushed it open and walked inside. Room was already half full. Students were sitting in the rows of chairs that had been set up facing the grand piano at the front. The piano was beautiful and black and shiny, and it looked like something from a concert hall. He had never played on anything like it before. His fingers itched just looking at it. Found a seat near the back and sat down quietly. More students filed in over the next few minutes, and the noise level grew as people talked and joked with each other. The teacher walked in and stood at the front of the room and called for everyone to settle down. She explained how the evaluations would work. Each student would come up and play their chosen piece, and the rest of the class would listen respectfully. She said that word with emphasis, like she knew it was going to be a problem. Then she called the first name. A girl went up and played a simple pop song that she had learned from the internet. It was fine, and people clapped politely when she finished. Then a boy went up and played something classical, but he made a lot of mistakes and got flustered and had to start over twice. People whispered, but the teacher shushed them one by one. Students took their turn at the piano. Some were good and some were not, and most were somewhere in the middle. The crowd got restless as the hour went on. People started checking their phones under their desks and passing notes and whispering to their friends. He watched all of this from his seat in the back, and his anxiety grew with every passing minute. Then the teacher looked at her list and called his name. For a second, he did not move. It was like his body had forgotten how to stand up, but then he pushed himself out of the chair and started walking toward the front of the room, and that was when it started. Heard someone whisper behind him, "Wait, he plays piano." Another voice answered since when a few people laughed softly. Kept walking and tried to ignore it, but his face was getting hot when he passed the middle rows. A boy leaned over to his friend and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is going to be interesting." More laughter. He reached the piano and sat down on the bench, and the room got a little quieter, but not quiet enough. He could still hear them. Someone in the back made a comment about his shoes. Another person wondered out loud if he even knew how to read music. A girl giggled and whispered something to her friend, and they both looked at him and smirked. The teacher told everyone to be quiet, but her voice did not carry much weight. The damage was already done. He sat there on that bench with his hands in his lap, and he felt smaller than he had ever felt in his life. All those years of being invisible, and now suddenly everyone was looking at him, but not because they were curious, not because they wanted to hear what he could do. They were looking at him because they expected him to fail, because the quiet kid from the poor part of town could not possibly have anything to offer, because people like him did not do things like this. He could feel his hands trembling, and his vision was getting blurry around the edges. For a moment he thought about standing up and walking out. He could leave right now and go back to being invisible, and no one would ever mention this again. It would be so easy to disappear, to let them win. But then something inside him shifted. He thought about his grandmother sitting beside him on that old couch. He thought about her soft voice telling him that music was a gift, and that gifts were meant to be shared. He thought about his mother coming home exhausted every single night, but still asking him about his day, still caring, still fighting for him. He thought about all the nights he spent at that old piano in the community center, playing until his fingers hurt, playing until the world made sense again. They did not know him. None of them knew what he had been through. None of them knew what he could do. Suddenly he was not afraid anymore. He was not angry either. He just felt calm, a deep, steady calm that started in his chest and spread out to his fingertips. Placed his hands on the keys, and he took one last breath. The room was still buzzing with whispers and quiet laughter. Someone in the back said something, and a few people snickered, but he did not hear them anymore. He closed his eyes, and he let the world fall away. And Then he began to play. The first note rang out into the room like a bell. It was soft and delicate, and it hung in the air for just a moment before the second note followed, and then the third, and then something happened that nobody expected. Whispers stopped, not slowly but all at once, like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire classroom. The boy, who had been leaning over to make another joke, froze with his mouth half open. The girls who had been giggling in the back went silent. The teacher, who had been preparing to shush the class one more time, lowered her hand and just watched. Because what was coming from that piano was not what anyone had imagined. It was not a simple song learned from the internet. It was not a clumsy attempt at something too difficult. It was something else entirely. It was Chopin, one of the most beautiful and most difficult pieces ever written for piano, and he was playing it like he had been born to do exactly this. His fingers moved across the keys with a speed and grace that seemed impossible. They danced and they flew and they whispered and they roared. The music started, soft and sad, like a memory of something lost. It told a story without words, a story of struggle and pain and loneliness, a story that everyone in that room could feel even if they did not understand. I've kept his eyes closed the entire time. He did not need to see the keys, because he had played this piece 1,000 times before in the community center when no one was watching. In his dreams, when the world was quiet, in his heart where the music had always lived, the melody grew stronger, and the notes came faster, and the sound filled every corner of the room. It bounced off the walls and wrapped around the students like a wave. Some of them leaned forward in their seats without realizing it. Others sat completely still like statues, afraid to move and break the spell. A girl in the front row felt her eyes getting wet, and she did not know why. She had never cried listening to music before. She had never felt anything like this before, but there was something in the way he played that reached inside her and touched something deep. Something she had forgotten was there. The boy who had made fun of his shoes was staring at the piano with his mouth slightly open. All the clever things he had planned to say were gone from his mind. He could not think of a single joke. He could not think of anything at all except the sound that was filling his ears and making his chest feel tight. The teacher had tears running down her face, but she did not wipe them away. She had been teaching music for over 20 years, and she had heard many students play. Some of them had gone on to study at famous schools. Some of them had won competitions and awards. But she had never heard anything like this. Not from a student, not from anyone. This was the kind of playing that came from somewhere beyond practice and technique. This was the kind of playing that came from the soul. The music shifted and changed and grew more intense. The notes crashed into each other like thunder and then pulled apart into something soft and tender. It was like watching a storm and a sunrise at the same time, powerful and gentle, heartbreaking and hopeful. He poured everything into those keys. Every lonely night he had ever spent, every time someone had looked through him like he was not there, every moment he had felt like he did not belong in this world, but also every happy memory. His grandmother teaching him his first song, his mother kissing his forehead before she left for work, the feeling of sitting at the piano in the community center when the light came through the windows just right. All of it was there in the music. All of it was finally being heard. The piece built to its climax, and his hands moved so fast they were almost a blur. The sound was huge and overwhelming, and it seemed impossible that it was coming from just one person. Students who had never paid attention to classical music in their lives were completely captivated. They did not know the name of the piece, or who had composed it, or what it was supposed to mean, but they knew it was special. They knew they were witnessing something that did not happen every day. They knew that the quiet boy they had ignored for years was showing them a part of himself that he had kept hidden, and it was beautiful. The music began to slow down, the thunder faded, and the notes became gentle again. It was like the end of a long journey, a traveler finally coming home after years of wandering. He played the final phrases with such tenderness that it hurt to listen. Each note was like a goodbye, each chord was like an embrace. And then the last note came. He held it for a long moment, letting it ring out into the silence, letting it fade slowly until there was nothing left but the echo of something that had changed everything. Lifted his hands from the keys and placed them in his lap. He opened his eyes and he looked out at a room full of people he had never really known. People who had never really known him. Something was different now. The air itself felt different, heavier. Somehow full of something that had not been there before. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. It was like the whole world had paused to catch its breath. The clock on the wall kept ticking, but time seemed to have stopped inside that room. He sat there on the bench, not knowing what to do next. He had played the piece from beginning to end without a single mistake. He had done what he came to do. But now that it was over, he felt strangely empty, like he had given away something precious, and he was not sure if anyone understood what it was. The silence stretched on 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and still no one made a sound. He started to wonder if he had made a mistake. Maybe they had not liked it. Maybe they were just waiting for him to leave so they could laugh. Maybe he had been foolish to think that this would change anything. He began to stand up from the bench. His legs felt weak and his heart was pounding. And he just wanted to go back to his seat in the corner where no one would look at him. But before he could take a single step, something happened. The teacher rose from her chair. She brought her hands together once, twice, 3 times. She was clapping, and then someone else started clapping too, and then another person and another, and suddenly the whole room was filled with the sound of applause. He turned around slowly, not quite believing what he was hearing. Students were getting to their feet one by one. The girl in the front row was wiping tears from her cheeks and clapping at the same time. The boy who had made fun of him was standing up with a look on his face that was hard to read. It might have been shame. It might have been amazement. It was probably both. The applause grew louder and it did not stop. It went on and on until his ears were ringing and his eyes were burning, and he did not know what to do with his hands, so he just stood there, a 17-year-old kid from a tiny apartment above a laundromat, kid who had taught himself to play piano from library books and online videos at HOA. Kid who had been invisible his entire life, and for the first time ever everyone was looking at him, not through him, at him. They were not laughing. They were cheering. The applause finally died down, but the feeling in the room did not fade. He made his way back to his seat on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Everything seemed unreal, like he was walking through a dream he might wake up from at any second. Students turned to look at him as he passed, and for once their eyes held something other than indifference. Some of them smiled, some of them nodded, some of them just stared like they were seeing him for the very first time, because in a way they were. The teacher asked if anyone else needed to perform, but no one raised their hand. How could they follow what had just happened? How could anyone sit down at that piano after what they had just witnessed? She dismissed the class a few minutes early and told everyone to have a good weekend, but nobody rushed for the door like they usually did. Instead, something strange happened. People started walking toward him. The first one to reach him was a girl he had never spoken to before. She had long brown hair, and she was in his English class, but he did not even know her name. She stopped in front of his desk and looked at him with wide eyes. "That was incredible," she said. Her voice was soft, like she was almost afraid to speak. "I had no idea you could play like that." He did not know what to say, so he just nodded and mumbled a thank you. She smiled at him and walked away, and before he could process what had just happened, another person took her place, then another, and another. For the next 10 minutes, a steady stream of classmates came up to him. Some of them said they were sorry for not noticing him before. Some of them asked how long he had been playing. Some of them wanted to know if he gave lessons or if he was going to study music in college. He answered their questions as best he could, but his mind was spinning. This was more attention than he had received in his entire life combined. He did not know how to handle it. Part of him wanted to run away and hide somewhere quiet, but another part of him felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt seen. He felt like he mattered. He felt like maybe he had been wrong about the world. Maybe people were not as cruel as he thought. Maybe they just needed a reason to look closer. The crowd around his desk finally thinned out, and he thought he might be able to escape. But then he saw someone walking toward him, and his stomach tightened. It was the boy who had made fun of him, one who had laughed at his shoes and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, the one who had expected him to fail. He braced himself for whatever was coming. Maybe the boy was going to say it was all a joke. Maybe he was going to find some way to tear down what had just happened. But when the boy reached his desk, he did not look smug or mean, looked uncomfortable, like he would rather be anywhere else in the world than standing right here. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked down at the floor. I just wanted to say something, he started. His voice was quieter than usual. What I said before was wrong. I should not have made those jokes. I did not know you could play like that. Nobody knew. He paused and took a breath. But that is not really an excuse, is I should not have said those things even if you could not play at all. It was not cool, and I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air between them. He looked at the boy who had tormented him, and he saw something he did not expect. He saw regret, real, genuine regret, not the kind of fake apology people give when they get caught, but the kind that comes from realizing you were wrong and wishing you could take it back. Could have been angry. He had every right to be, but anger felt like too much effort and holding on to. It would not change anything, so instead he just nodded. It is okay, he said. The boy looked surprised, like he had expected a different response. No, it is not okay, the boy said, but I appreciate you saying that. He stuck out his hand. I am serious, though. That was the best thing I've ever heard. You had a real gift, man. He shook the boy's hand, and something shifted between them. They would probably never be friends. Too much had happened for that, but they were not enemies either. Not anymore. The boy walked away, and he finally gathered his things and headed for the door. The teacher was waiting for him. She had been standing by her desk, watching everything unfold with a look on her face that he could not quite read. Can I talk to you for a minute? She asked. He nodded and walked over to her. She did not say anything right away. She just looked at him like she was trying to figure something out. Where did you learn to play like that? She finally asked. He told her about his grandmother, about the old keyboard, and the lessons on the couch, and the promise he made. He told her about the community center and the years of teaching himself. He told her about the library books and the videos, and the late nights when it was just him and the music. She listened to every word without interrupting. When he finished, she shook her head slowly. Do you have any idea how rare what you have is? She asked. I have been teaching for over 20 years. I have sent students to some of the best music schools in the country, but I have never heard a student play with that kind of emotion. Technique can be taught, but what you have comes from somewhere else. It comes from inside you, and you cannot teach that. He did not know how to respond. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. She reached into her desk and pulled out a piece of paper. Want you to have this, she said. It is information about a scholarship program for young musicians. The deadline is in 3 weeks. I think you should apply. He looked at the paper in her hands, and his heart started beating faster. Scholarship programs were for other people, for kids with money and connections and proper training, not for him. She must have seen the doubt on his face, because she leaned forward and looked him right in the eyes. Listen to me, she said. What happened in this room today does not happen every day. People are going to remember this for a long time. You have something special, and you owe it to yourself to see how far it can take you. Do not let anyone tell you that you do not belong, not even yourself. She pressed the paper into his hand and gave him a small smile. Think about it, she said, and if you need help with the application, I am here. He thanked her and walked out of the room in a dazed hallway. was crowded with students heading to their lockers and making plans for the weekend, but something was different. People were looking at him not in the old way where they looked through him like he did not exist. They were actually looking at him. A few people he did not know said hey or nodded at him as he passed. Someone called out "nice job" from across the hall. He kept walking and tried to act normal, but inside he was falling apart. Not in a bad way, in the way you fall apart when something you thought was impossible suddenly becomes real. He reached his locker and opened it and just stood there for a moment. Paper from the teacher was still in his hand. He unfolded it and read the words at the top: National Young Artist Scholarship Program, full tuition for music studies at partner universities. He read it again just to make sure he had not imagined it. Full tuition, that meant he could go to college. He could study music for real. He could have a future that looked different from the one he had always assumed was waiting for him. His hands were shaking as he folded the paper carefully and put it in his backpack. He closed his locker and leaned his forehead against the cool metal. For so long he had believed that his life was already written, that kids like him did not get chances like this, that the best he could hope for was to survive and maybe find a job that did not make him miserable. But now there was a door in front of him that had not been there before, and all he had to do was walk through it. The bell rang, and the hallway started to empty. He pushed himself away from the locker and headed for the exit. Sun was bright when he stepped outside, and the air was warm, and everything looked the same as it always did. The same buses lined up in the same parking lot, the same trees swaying in the same breeze. But he was not the same. He could feel it in his bones. Something had changed inside him, and there was no going back. He started walking toward the bus stop, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he did not keep his head down. He did not try to make himself small. He walked with his shoulders back and his eyes forward, and he let the world see him, because he was done hiding. He was done being invisible. He had spent 17 years waiting for someone to notice him, and today he had learned that sometimes you have to make them notice. Sometimes you have to sit down at the piano and play your heart out and show them who you really are, even if your hands are shaking, even if your voice is quiet, even if you are scared out of your mind. You have to do it anyway, because that is the only way anything ever changes. The bus pulled up and he climbed on and found a seat by the window, watched the school disappear behind him, and he thought about what was waiting for him at home. His mother would still be at work. The apartment would still be empty. The washing machines would still be spinning downstairs, but tonight when she came home, he would have something to tell her, something that might make all those double shifts and tired eyes and sacrifices feel worth. I pulled the paper out of his backpack and looked at it one more time. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind he had almost forgotten how to make, and he held on to that feeling all the way home. He got off the bus at the corner of his street and started the familiar walk home. The laundromat was busy like it always was on Friday afternoons. Through the big windows, he could see people folding clothes and waiting for their machines to finish. The sound of the dryers hummed through the walls. As he climbed the narrow staircase to the apartment, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as he had left it this morning. The small kitchen with the chipped countertops, the old couch with the blanket his grandmother had made years ago, the tiny bedroom he shared with stacks of library books, and dreams that always felt too big for this place. But today, the apartment did not feel small today. It felt like a starting point. Dropped his backpack on the couch and pulled out the paper from the teacher. He read it again slowly. This time every word felt heavy with possibility. There was an application form and a list of requirements. He would need to submit a video of himself playing. There was an application form and a list of requirements. He would need to submit a video of himself playing. Would need to write an essay about his musical journey. He would need letters of recommendation. 3 weeks to put it all together. It seemed impossible. But then again, so did everything that had happened today. Sat down at the kitchen table and spread the papers out in front of him for the next few hours. He read through every detail and made notes and tried to figure out how he was going to do this. The community center had an old camera they used for events. Maybe they would let him borrow it. The teacher had already offered to help with the application. She could probably write one of the recommendation letters. He did not know who else to ask, but he would figure it out. He had to. The sun started to set, and the light coming through the window turned golden and warm. He made himself a sandwich and ate it standing at the counter while he watched the sky change colors. His mother would be home in a few hours. He could not stop thinking about how he was going to tell her. She had given up so much for him. She had worked herself to the bone just to keep a roof over their heads. She had never complained. Even when things got really hard, even when they had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying groceries, she always found a way to make it work, and she always made sure he knew that she believed in him, even when he did not believe in himself. He wanted to give her something back. He wanted to show her that all those sacrifices were not for nothing, that her son was going to be okay, that maybe he was going to be more than okay. The hours passed slowly. He tried to watch something on the old television, but he could not focus. He tried to read, but the words kept blurring together, so he just sat on the couch and waited and thought and remembered. He thought about his grandmother and the way she used to hum while she cooked. He thought about the first time she put his fingers on the piano keys and showed him how to make a sound. He thought about the look on her face when he played his first real song all the way through without any mistake. She had cried that day. Happy tears, she called them. Best kind of tears. He wished she could have been there today. Wished she could have seen him walk up to that piano and show everyone what he could do. She would have been so proud. She would have hugged him tight and told him she always knew he had it in him, but even though she was gone, he could still feel her with him in the music, in the memories, in the quiet moments when he closed his eyes and imagined her sitting beside him. She had given him a gift that could never be taken away, and today he had finally shared that gift with the world. Just like she always wanted him to. The front door opened and his mother walked in. She looked tired, like she always did after a double shift. Her shoulders were slumped and there were dark circles under her eyes. But when she saw him sitting on the couch, she smiled. That smile that always made everything feel a little bit better. "Hey, baby," she said. "How was your day?" He stood up and walked over to her. For a moment, he did not say anything. He just looked at her and felt a wave of emotion rise up in his chest. She must have seen something in his face because her smile faded into concern. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Is everything okay?" He nodded and took a breath. "Everything is okay," he said. "Actually, everything is more than okay. Something happened today. Something big." She set down her purse and took off her coat and gave him her full attention. "Tell me," she said. So he told her. He told her about walking up to the piano and hearing the whispers. He told her about the fear that almost made him walk away. He told her about closing his eyes and thinking of Grandma and finding the courage to play. He told her about the music filling the room and the silence that followed. He told her about the standing ovation and the apologies and the conversations with classmates who had never spoken to him before. He told her about the teacher and the scholarship and the chance to study music at a real university. He told her everything, and as he spoke, he watched her face change. The tiredness melted away, and something else took its place. Her eyes got wet, and her hand came up to cover her mouth. When he finished talking, she did not say anything for a long moment. She just stood there, looking at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Then she crossed the room and pulled him into a hug. It was the kind of hug that said everything words could. Not the kind of hug that held years of struggle and sacrifice and hope, all wrapped up together. They stood there. For a long time, he could feel her shoulders shaking, and he knew she was crying. But these were the good kind of tears, the best kind. When she finally pulled back, She held his face in her hands and looked into his eyes. "I am so proud of you," she whispered. "You know that I have always been proud of you." He nodded because he could not trust his voice to work. She wiped her eyes and let out a shaky laugh. "My baby," she said, "playing piano like that in front of everyone, your grandmother would have loved to see that. She's probably up there right now telling all the angels to be quiet so she can brag about her grandson." He laughed too, and it felt good. It felt like something heavy had been lifted off his shoulders, something he had been carrying for so long. He forgot it was even there. They sat down together at the kitchen table, and he showed her the scholarship papers. She read through them carefully, asking questions and nodding along. When she got to the part about full tuition, her hands started shaking. "Do you know what this means?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He nodded. "It means I could go to college," he said. "It means I could study music for real. It means everything you worked for was not for nothing." She shook her head and reached across the table to take his hand. "Though," she said, "it was never for nothing. Every single day I went to work, I did it because I knew you were going to do something amazing someday. I did it because I believed in you even when the world did not. This scholarship is wonderful, and I hope you get it, but even if you do not, you are still the most incredible person I know. And I would work 100 more double shifts just to watch you chase your dreams." He felt the tears coming, and this time he did not try to stop them. They sat there together in that tiny kitchen, holding hands and crying and laughing. Two people who had been through so much, but never stopped believing that better days were coming. Outside the window, the stars were starting to appear one by one. The washing machines downstairs had gone quiet. The world was settling into night, but inside that small apartment, something new was beginning. A chapter that had been waiting to be written for 17 years was finally starting. He did not know what the future would hold. He did not know if he would get the scholarship, or where he would end up, or what challenges were still ahead. But for the first time in his life, he was not afraid of the unknown, because he had learned something important. Today he learned that the things that make us different are often the things that make us special. He learned that the people who try to tear you down are usually just afraid of what you might become. He learned that courage is not about being fearless. It is about being terrified and doing it anyway. And most importantly, he learned that no matter how invisible you feel, there is always someone out there waiting to hear your song. You just have to be brave enough to play it. His mother squeezed his hand one more time and smiled at him. "So," she said, "when do we start working on that application?" He smiled back. "Right now," he said, and together they spread out the papers on the kitchen table and got to work building a future note by note, just like his grandmother had taught him all those years ago. The quiet boy who nobody noticed had finally found his voice, and the whole world was about to hear it.